Okay, let's dive right into this. Welcome to this explainer where we are going to unpack what has to be one of the most harrowing, unbelievable, and honestly ultimately inspiring survival stories in modern human history. We're looking at the crash of Uruguayan Air Force Flight 571, way deep in the Andes Mountains back in 1972. It's a story that absolutely pushes the limits of what we think the human body and spirit can endure.
All of the passengers were given up for dead. Just imagine hearing that on the news. When that was broadcasted, it wasn't just some pessimistic guess by a guy on the ground, you know? It was the official, definitive consensus broadcasted to the entire world. Imagine the absolute despair wrapped up in those words. For the families back home, that was the tragic end. But for the people who were actually up on that mountain, their nightmare was literally just beginning.
Because what we are really talking about today is this number right here, 72. That is the unimaginable number of days a group of mostly ordinary young rugby players survived while stranded in the freezing, completely unforgiving peaks of the Andes mountain range. Just think about that. 72 days with absolutely no rescue in sight.
So, how did this all go down? Well, the tragedy unfolded really fast. On October 12th, this chartered aircraft takes off for Santiago, Chile. But a mountain storm forces them to delay in Argentina. The very next day, October 13th, they decide to try again. Unfortunately, heavy cloud cover and some extreme turbulence lead to a completely devastating pilot error. Fast forward just 8 days to October 21st, and the official search is completely called off. But to truly understand how they got to that point, we've got to rewind to the actual moment of the crash on the 13th.
The immediate, violent toll of this crash was just devastating. There were 45 total passengers on board. When the pilots rapidly tried to climb out of the clouds to avoid a rocky peak, they ended up clipping the mountain. The entire rear of the plane just sheared right off. The front fuselage then acted like this massive, horrific toboggan, sliding 700 meters down a solid glacier at an estimated 350 kilometers per hour. And yet, miraculously, despite that violent impact, 33 people initially survived.
But here's the thing. Surviving the crash was only the very first hurdle. They were immediately hit with a brutal reality check. Remember, these were young men from coastal areas. A lot of them had never even seen snow in their entire lives. Suddenly, they're thrust into an altitude of 3,570 meters, dealing with negative 30 degrees Celsius temperatures at night. They had zero mountaineering gear, nothing. And to battle the blinding ultraviolet reflection coming off all that snow, the entire group of 33 people only had 3 pairs of sunglasses among them.
So, the big question is, how do you adapt when you literally have nothing? Dehydration was an immediate, lethal threat at that altitude. Well, a survivor named Fido Strach engineered this brilliant, life-saving solution completely on the fly without any actual tools. Step 1, he positioned a metal sheet from the plane's wreckage to act as a solar collector. Step 2, this concentrated the sun's rays just enough to start melting the snow. And step 3, they carefully collected those precious, life-saving water droplets in empty wine bottles. I mean, that is just pure brilliance under pressure.
But despite that incredible resourcefulness, time was rapidly working against them. 142. That is the total number of hours the official search operation lasted. You see, here is the absolutely tragic reality of their situation. The plane's fuselage was white. It was perfectly camouflaged against the endless white snow and ice of the glacier. 11 different aircraft from 3 nations flew right over the area. But after 142 hours, authorities completely abandoned hope.
Which brings us to what has to be one of the most heartbreaking moments of this entire ordeal. 11 days post-crash, a survivor named Roy Harley, who was kind of this electronics enthusiast, actually manages to rig up a makeshift antenna for a little transistor radio they found in the seats. It was this massive, massive victory for the group. But the very first thing they hear when they turn it on, a news broadcast announcing that the official search has been canceled. That was it. They were officially on their own. No one was coming.
Now we have to talk about the sheer scale of the desperation they were facing, because it's truly hard to wrap your mind around. They were rationing what little food they had so severely that one man, Fernando Parado, made a single chocolate-covered peanut last for 3 entire days. Let that sink in for a second. With absolutely zero plant or animal life at that altitude, the starving survivors had to make a deeply taboo but strictly necessary biological choice. They had to consume the bodies of their deceased friends and family members just to stay alive. It's a stark, very real reminder of the absolute lengths the human body must go to in order to survive starvation.
And just as they crossed that immense psychological threshold, the mountain decided to strike them again. 19. That number marks a devastating drop in survivors. On day 16, this massive avalanche just roared down the mountain in the dead of night, completely burying the broken fuselage. It suffocated 8 more people. The remaining 19 survivors were trapped inside this cramped, freezing, snow-filled space for 3 agonizing days before they could finally dig a tunnel to the surface.
When they finally did get out, the reality was crystal clear. Waiting around was a death sentence. They had to save themselves. But tragically, their entire self-rescue plan was built on a fatal geographical error. Before he died in the crash, the co-pilot had stated they had passed Corico. Because of this, the survivors logically assumed they were just a short, manageable hike from the green western valleys of Chile. In reality, they were actually 89 kilometers deep inside the highest peaks of the Andes.
Still, they tried absolutely everything. A small expedition team hiked east and actually found the tail section of the plane, which housed a 2-way radio. Imagine the hope they felt. But they immediately faced a painful technical mismatch. The airplane's radio system required a 115-volt AC power source. The heavy batteries they found in the tail, those were only 24-volt DC. Despite days of frantic, desperate efforts to wire them together, it was electrically impossible to connect them and send an SOS. Just another massive hope dashed.
And all the while, the clock is ticking down relentlessly. 16. On December 11th, which was day 59 of the ordeal, yet another avalanche hit, claiming 3 more lives. Only 16 survivors remained. The urgency to escape didn't just peak here, it became an absolute do-or-die mandate. They had to organize a final expedition to climb those massive western mountains.
But listen, to survive the negative 30-degree nights on a mountain trek, they desperately needed shelter, and this required some true survival engineering. An 18-year-old survivor, Carlos Miguel Rodriguez, remembered his mom teaching him how to sew. So step 1, they salvaged insulation material from the airplane's tail. Step 2, he busts out his small personal sewing kit. And step 3, he painstakingly stitches all these pieces into a massive 3-person sleeping bag. That single piece of handcrafted custom tech, that would be the only thing keeping the expedition team alive at night.
And you gotta wonder, what exactly were they wearing for this epic climb? Well, their expedition gear was shockingly inadequate. 3 pairs of jeans, 3 sweaters pulled over a t-shirt, 4 pairs of socks with literal plastic shopping bags tied over their feet to keep the freezing snow out. No ropes, no ice axes, no specialized climbing boots, just sheer, unadulterated willpower as Fernando Parado and Roberto Canessa set out on day 60 to conquer the Andes. It took them 3 grueling, exhausting days of slipping and sliding just to reach the summit. And when they finally crested that peak, fully expecting to look down upon the lush green valleys of Chile, they were met with absolute devastation. As Parado later said, "Instead of green valleys, we saw mountains 360 degrees around us." The crushing despair of that moment, it's just unimaginable. Their journey wasn't almost over. It was infinitely longer than they had ever calculated.
Faced with this vast, deadly unknown, they made a really tough, highly strategic move. A 3rd expedition member, Visitin, had accompanied them up to the peak. He turned back, descending the mountain in just 1 single hour by using an airplane seat as a makeshift sleigh. Crazy, right? But why did he do it? To conserve their rapidly dwindling meat supply, leaving Parado and Canessa to push forward entirely alone into those endless mountains.
The sheer endurance that followed was basically miraculous. On December 12th, this final trek begins. For 9 exhaustive, agonizing days, these 2 emaciated men hiked across jagged ridges and down dangerous glaciers. Finally, on December 20th, the snowy landscape gave way to a river valley, and they spotted a farmer across a raging river. The next day, December 21st, the farmer returned, and a life-saving note was thrown.
Parado literally scribbled this desperate note: "I come from a plane that fell in the mountains. I am Uruguayan." He attached this scrap of paper to a rock and hurled it with everything he had across the roaring river to the farmer Sergio Catalan. Catalan read it, signaled that he understood, threw them some bread, and immediately embarked on a 10-hour horseback ride to alert the authorities.
And I really want you to process this number for a second. 61. That is the impossible 61-kilometer distance these completely untrained, starving, dying men trekked across the Andes Mountains on sheer will alone. By the time they were found, Roberto Canessa had lost exactly half of his body weight. He weighed only 44 kilograms.
Which brings us finally to the ultimate triumph, the rescue. On December 22, 1972, 70 days after the initial crash, Chilean Air Force helicopters finally launched. And get this, Parado, despite his catastrophic physical condition, actually got right back into the helicopter to guide the pilots through the treacherous mountain peaks back to the crash site. All 16 remaining survivors were successfully saved, overcoming massive malnutrition, severe dehydration, and altitude sickness to finally go home.
So, as we wrap up this incredibly moving explainer, I want to leave you with this final thought. In the face of ultimate uncertainty, how fiercely would you fight for tomorrow? The miracle of the Andes isn't just a story about a horrific plane crash. It is a profound, lasting testament to the unpredictable nature of life and the absolute, unstoppable power of the human spirit. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.